Good vach. Oh, let me start here. Good vach, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our webinar. I look forward, Rabbi Kolobach, I want to say to you, I look forward to Motzei Shabbos every week to hear the stories of the Rabbeim and the Rebbe in particular as we lead up to Yud Aleph Nisan in just 11 days' time. I also want to point out that on the 11th of Nisan, we're going to be doing at 6 p.m. a gift to the Rebbe, a gift to oneself, and a gift to the world. Rabbi Garelik will be speaking from the Ohel. It'll be an 18-minute program, 6 p.m. in Johannesburg. Rabbi Garelik will be speaking. We'll also capital 120 together, which I hope you'll elaborate on, Rabbi Karlebach. But as I said, I look forward to hearing you every Motzei Shabbos because I have learned so much, and I thought I knew history well, but hearing you is absolutely invigorating. So thank you for making the time. I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi Masinta. First of all, as mentioned, tonight is and tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is 11 days before the Rebbe's birthday. So Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Aleph Nisan is tomorrow. We don't say Tachnun for the entire month. We say the Nossi the first 12, 13 days. And Sunday night, tomorrow night, and Monday is Beis Nisan, which is the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe's yahrzeit. We discussed him at length, one of these Mitzvah Shabboses. He passed away on the 2nd of Nisan in 1920 and is interred in Rostov on Don. You could even go to his mikveh. And Yud Aleph Nisan, the Rebbe's 120th birthday, or leading up to that, it's 119th birthday actually, but in his 120th year, is going to be the 24th of March. And I would encourage everyone to give the Rebbe a birthday present and in that way give it to yourself as well. To encourage, to write to the Rebbe, to do one of his 10 Mivtzoim, and to join the webinar on the 11th of Nisan, as Rabbi Masinta mentioned. So let's get right into it. We are up to the daily routine of the Rebbe. Many people are interested to know what was the Rebbe's daily routine. And a person would say some people think he spends his entire day in prayer, in Torah study. Other people believe he receives people and answers their questions all day long. Some claim that he spends hours in solitude, and others think that he simply performs the duties of the Director General of Chabad institutions scattered throughout the world. And you know what? They are all right. To say that the Rebbe works very, very hard would only prove that the person making that statement has not the slightest idea what working hard really means. There's no one in the world that ever bared the same burden of responsibility and duty as the Rebbe. Do you know that the Rebbe not only never took a single vacation, but in all his years of his leadership, he never said, I am tired, I need a day off, maybe I'll go get some fresh air at the seashore, not even for an hour. And by the way, many elder Hasidim encouraged and tried to persuade the Rebbe to take some day off. And they said, when you look at the history of all the Chabad Rebbes before you, there was not one who did not take time off to go on what they call dacha, to go on a break, a vacation, and you need it for your health. The Rebbe never took even an hour off. Even after suffering that severe heart attack in 1977, that Shmini Atzeres Tovshin Lamed Ches, he was working the next day. In fact, Mitzvah Yom Tov, he already had a Fabrengen broadcast on that hookup on the radio, teaching Torah and sorting through hundreds of letters and dispensing blessings to Jews, in spite of the doctors trying to encourage him not to. Dr. Weiss tells that he told the Rebbe, you need, after such a heart attack, you need a break. Take a bit of time off before you go through all the mail. And the Rebbe said, what, you think you're helping me with your advice? I am the only one who opens my mail. If I don't open it, it'll just pile up. He got, as we'll discuss, how many letters a day. So if he said, if he doesn't take to them immediately and answer them, it'll just be an added burden in the days to come. We know that the Rebbe slept very, very little. No one knows exactly how many hours he sleeps, but one thing we do know, it is never more than 3 or 4 hours a night. He also ate and drank very little. For example, on a Shabbos afternoon, after the service, he would come to the Fabrengen and recite Kiddush, which means he didn't eat in his room, over wine, eats a little bit of cake, until the end of the Fabrengen, which is almost the conclusion of Shabbos. He eats nothing else. During the entire Shabbos, all the Rebbe may eat is the evening meal and a small piece of cake during the day. Those who knew him in his youth say that even then, he limited himself to eat the bare minimum. On those days when the Rebbe would visit the gravesite of the Ohel of the previous Rebbe, he would eat nothing all day. He would only drink something on those days. So the Rebbe's typical routine was that at approximately 10 a.m., the Rebbe would be driven to 770 by one of his secretaries. He lived on President Street, which was not far from 770. On Mondays and Thursdays, the days of Torah reading, he would come into the shul and listen to the Torah reading in a minyan, and then say some Tillim there. After the Rebbetzin left this world, he attended all 3 daily prayers at shul. The Rebbe receives at least 1,000 letters every day, containing requests and questions from people all over the world. These letters were written by his Hasidim, other observant Jews, as well as people far removed from religion, for whom the Rebbe represents their only connection to Judaism, and many non-Jews also write to the Rebbe. You may wonder, what kind of questions did people ask? The answer is, what didn't they ask? There was either issues of health or work. Yeshiva students inquire about Torah and halacha. Scientists are interested in reconciling faith and science. Businessmen ask for business advice. State leaders, ministers, politicians from many countries submit questions of national importance for the Rebbe's verdict. The Rebbe always felt it was vital to keep his petitioners' letters in strict confidence. And that is why the Rebbe opened every letter personally. The Rebbe kept his replies very concise, often jotting them down in the margins of the letters. Before handing his reply to one of the secretaries, If it was an extremely confidential letter, the Rebbe would personally cut out any passages in the original letter that contained confidential information or references to matters of a private nature. The Rebbe sometimes would even write down his reply on the envelope. At times, the answer that resolves the sender's complex problem consisted of a few words. This offer should be accepted. Blessings and good luck. Sometimes do not get involved in that business. Seek the counsel of a friend who is a professional doctor. Let them contact the rabbi of their city. Your mezuzahs in your house should be examined. Your tefillin should be examined. In other instances, the Rebbe refers the petitioner to a specific medical specialist or rabbi who is an expert in halacha. And sometimes some replies and suggestions may be very long and detailed. The secretaries would type out the Rebbe's replies and send them to their destinations. Significantly, the Rebbe, in contrast to political figures or top-ranking officials, maintains personal contact with any Jew or person, whoever they might be, even a simple, uneducated person, and even a child. He never delegated these responsibilities to his secretaries. The Rebbe did not consider any question too trivial or beneath his dignity. In a minute, he can provide an answer to a child's question or a politician's question, which could potentially affect millions of people. In addition, the Rebbe functions as Director General of the entire network of Chabad projects, institutions, and organizations. He received weekly reports on the activities of all Chabad centers and emissaries dispersed throughout the world. Every week, the Rebbe had to make hundreds or even thousands of decisions concerning education, construction, budget allocation, human resources, and every field you can think of. Occasionally, the Rebbe didn't reply to a letter. A week or two go by, the Jew sends another letter. Why doesn't the Rebbe answer me? More time passes without any reply. And the guy begins to wonder, maybe the Rebbe forgot about me. Maybe he is angry at me. Far from it. Lubavitcher Hasidim say that sometimes the lack of a reply would have been a reply in itself. And you would go to older Hasidim, and after some thought, they would sometimes interpret the reply. You should know the Rebbe was the most incredible fast reader. At the times that he would give out Yechid, when he had Yechidus, the visitor would hand the Rebbe a note describing the issues he wished to discuss. Someone said he brought a letter that was 10 to 15 pages long. It took the Rebbe literally 20 seconds to read that letter. And their subsequent conversation made it clear that the Rebbe had not overlooked a single detail in that letter. As we mentioned in a previous time, Rabbi Mendel says that not only was the Rebbe the fastest reader and who took everything in, but he was able to listen to an inquiry that Rabbi Mendel would read to him of someone who wrote him while he was answering another letter. And the Rebbe's answers were unequivocal. The Rebbe made his decision on the spot without consulting anyone. And the way it appeared, he weighed up all the pros and cons, no one has ever seen the Rebbe waver or hesitated. His verdict was formed instantaneously, and the reply ready even before the Rebbe finished reading the letter. In addition, the Rebbe invariably shaped his reply to suit the person's level and style. If a visitor was a simple person, the reply would be simple. If an educated person wrote the letter, the Rebbe's reply would be designed to meet him on his own ground. The Rebbe's answers employed concepts and terms that were familiar to the person who came for a meeting or sending a letter. So, if it was a physicist, he would imply the terminology of modern physics. Physicians would contain medical terms. Recipients of the Rebbe's letters were absolutely certain that the Rebbe is a trained specialist involved in study and research in their field, and that he had spent a great deal of time writing his reply. In fact, the Rebbe probably only spent a few moments at most. But when the Rebbe composed his reply, we know that his senses and attention were intensely concentrated on the matter in hand. And 30 seconds of the Rebbe's concentration was equivalent to more than many, many hours of an ordinary person's. The Rebbe had no advisors, no aides. He didn't convene meetings or conferences. He made his own decisions and carried the entire burden of responsibility. He used a single yardstick for determining whether his decision is correct, and that is the extent to which it conformed to Torah and Halacha. Evidently, his brilliant mind, amazing memory, and boundless compassion for humanity, rooted in genuine love for the Jewish people and mankind in general, served him better than an army of advisors. The Rebbe was convinced that there is nothing in the world that is not contained in the Torah. And in this respect, the Rebbe had no shortage of advisors, all lined up on his bookshelf: the Tanakh, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, the entire literature of Halacha, and the Jewish thought amassed throughout the history of Judaism and Hasidus. They weren't only on his bookshelf, they were in the Rebbe himself. And occasionally, the Rebbe's reply appears at first glance to go against common sense, to be totally impractical and otherworldly. And this is the story that Professor Branover writes in his book about himself, which illustrates what was just said. He says a scientist had drawn closer to Judaism with the help of Chabad Hasidim while he was still in Russia. He was a vehement atheist, and yet he became a religious Jew, meticulous in his observance of mitzvahs. He overcame tremendous difficulties to emigrate from Russia, Soviet Union. After arriving in Israel, he obtained a job in an Israeli university. Before starting the university work, he traveled to the States to meet the Rebbe for the first time in his life. The Rebbe received him, and they spent several hours discussing the situation of Russian Jews, the possible ways of helping them, whether it was Jewish education also, and Torah and science. The scientist told the Rebbe about everything he had done during the several months since he left Russia. In passing, he mentioned that students from a Philadelphia university had invited him to deliver a lecture on the situation of Russian Jewry. At that point, the Rebbe told his visitor, almost as a seemingly incidental remark, "Oh, you're going to Philadelphia? You should look up a professor who is working in your field." The scientist was baffled by the Rebbe's remark. First of all, he knew every laboratory in the world involved in the field of his research, and he knew for sure that no one in Philadelphia conducted this work. Secondly, the Rebbe never told him where to look for this professor. He hadn't even mentioned that professor's name, and the scientist was too embarrassed to ask. In Philadelphia, the scientist spent a whole day searching and inquiring. Imagine his astonishment when, with the help of a Philadelphia chassid, Rabbi Shem Tov, he finally located the professor mentioned by the Rebbe. The surprising thing was that professor had just moved to Philadelphia from California, and he couldn't understand how anybody knew he was in Philadelphia. After a cordial meeting, it turned out the professor had actually been following the work published by Professor Baranover in the Soviet Union. So the professor from Philadelphia invited him to attend a national science conference that would focus on issues in the scientist's sphere of interest. The conference was to take place in 6 weeks. Professor Baranover thanked him, but declined his offer, saying, "I have to return to Israel and assume his university duties." Back in New York, the scientist, Professor Baranover, wrote to the Rebbe, describing his trip to Philadelphia and mentioning that he indeed had located his colleague who had given him a warm welcome and invited him to deliver a lecture at an important conference. Unfortunately, added Professor Baranover, he was unable to accept the invitation since the conference was to take place in 6 weeks' time. Just a couple hours later, he received a letter from the Rebbe who said, "Try to reschedule your plans. Make sure you attend that conference. And do not forget to settle the issue of your extended stay in the States with your university administration. Furthermore, make sure that the airline does not overcharge you for changing your flight." Baranover was astounded. He had just been accepted for a job. Hundreds of students were awaiting his lectures in Israel. Under these circumstances, how could he remain in the States for such a long time? What would his students think of their lecturer abandoning them before the course even started just to attend some conference, the like of which takes place a dozen times a year? Furthermore, he was amazed by the concern and attention of the Rebbe, a leader of global stature, regarding such technicalities as his relationship with the university administration, and not only that, but the cost of his airplane tickets. Being a Chabadnik, he knows never to question the Rebbe's advice, even though the Rebbe's instructions are sometimes difficult to fathom, and yet his suggestion to seek out that Philadelphia professor had been just as incomprehensible. The scientist changed his ticket and extended his stay. At that conference, 6 weeks later, 2 men wearing American Navy uniforms approached him, and they said, "Are you Dr. Baranover?" He said, "Yes, I am. We are familiar with your research, and would like you to work for us. As exciting as the offer sounded, he was forced to decline. He said, I spent so many years struggling for my right to live in Israel. How can I leave that country I've dreamed about for so long? The two Moldovans replied for a long time. And one of them said, as a matter of fact, you can work for us from Israel in your university laboratory. He said, but I don't have a laboratory. I just started to work there. They were not dismayed. They said, we will provide you with whatever you need to set up a laboratory. This story took place many years ago when Granover first left Russia. The contact between the scientists and the American Navy lasted for many, many years. It led to the development of advanced technologies whose implementation, incidentally, employs many immigrants from the Soviet Union. All this was the result of the Rebbe's instructions that seemed so puzzling at the time, defying all logic and common sense. Yet look at the Rebbe's vision. Another story he tells is that generally Chabad Hasidim had a rule. When they wanted to get married, they came to the Rebbe first, and usually he gave them his blessing. It seemed like a fairly simple, straightforward matter, yet not always so simple. And here is another story in which the Rebbe's counsel appeared to contradict common sense. And it says, Sarah, which is a fictitious name, a divorcee with 3 children, had a very difficult life. She hoped to find a man with whom she could build a new family. Sarah met Jacob, a former atheist who had returned to the Jewish faith. From their first meeting, they liked one another. Just a few weeks later, they decided to get married. Jacob promised, don't worry, I will take care of your children as if they are my own. Sarah wrote to the Rebbe asking for a bracha. His reply came several days later. The Rebbe advised her, try other options, and withheld his bracha for this shidduch. Sarah was brokenhearted. For years, she had already dreamt of a man she could trust, someone who would take her and the children under his wing. And she finally found one, the perfect guy. And now this blow. The Rebbe had not given his blessing. Jacob was also very distressed by the development. Sarah thought to himself, the Rebbe doesn't know us at all. He has never even seen us. How could he do this to us? However, she had often heard about the power of the Rebbe's advice and couldn't bring herself to defy it. With a heavy heart, Sarah broke up with this Jacob. Weeks went by, and Sarah found out the truth. This Jacob was not at all the man he had seemed at first. He was actually an alcoholic, and in his drunken state did not hesitate to use his fists. Weeks could go by when Jacob didn't touch alcohol, and at those times he was a charming, sensitive person. But this did not last, and he would go on his next drunken bout. By withholding his bracha, the Rebbe had saved Sarah and her children from a life with a deprived person. Incidentally, a year later, Sarah, with the Rebbe's bracha, married a scientist, a Baal Tshuva, and today they are living happily in the Sumerian settlement of Emmanuel. Thousands of childless couples ask the Rebbe for a bracha often during the distribution of dollars for tzedakah on Sunday mornings. The Rebbe handed $3 to a woman who lamented that after 10 years of marriage, she was still childless. This one is for you, says the Rebbe. This one for your husband. And here is another $1 for the children to be born. The woman was convinced that she would have a child, and not just one, but at least two, possibly twins. For the Rebbe had said for the children in the plural, and every syllable of the Rebbe was exact and to be studied. It is true, some couples' dreams come true within a year. Others have to wait 5, 10, or even more. But if the Rebbe gave them a bracha, they knew they are certain to have a child or several children. According to Chassidim, the outcome depends on the strength and sincerity of the couple's faith in the Rebbe's bracha and promise. A story is told about two childless couples who received the Rebbe's bracha on the same day. One of the couples had absolute faith in the miraculous power of the blessing and ran out to buy a baby carriage. And they spent their time in nervous expectation, the other couple. The ones who went out to buy the carriage had a baby within 9 months. The couple who didn't remained childless for several more years before having their child. Answering hundreds of letters day in and day out from 1950 till basically 1992 is in itself a task for an entire staff of workers rather than a single person. Yet that was only part of the Rebbe's routine. The telephones in the reception room rang nonstop. People whose daughter is about to undergo surgery asking for advice and a bracha, a parent whose son had been in a serious accident requesting a bracha, a businessman is offered a deal worth $100 million, but he's plagued by doubts concerning the risks involved and obviously need the Rebbe's counsel. A world-famous scientist has proposed a chair at Harvard University, but his wife doesn't want to move from New York to Boston. What should he do? A young politician is offered a tempting opportunity to run for mayor of Jerusalem. Should he take this chance? Every day, phone calls like this number in the hundreds. And the Rebbe's secretary jot down all these requests on pieces of paper, including the petitioner's name and mother's name. That, by the way, is besides those 1,000 letters that came per day. It boggles the mind. And usually twice a month, twice a week, in fact, in later years, the Rebbe would go during the day to the mikveh, and then he would go to the Tzion, to the ohel of his previous Rebbe, his father-in-law. There he stood in solitude and read the letters and notes, reciting prayers for all those who seek his blessing. The Rebbe's bracha always contained Asker al Tzion. I will mention you at the ohel of my father-in-law. The Rebbe never said, I'm giving you my blessing. I will mention you at the Tzion. And with these words he implied, all my powers and abilities stem from the previous Rebbe rather than from myself alone. He could stay at the ohel up to 7 hours, sometimes even longer, never eating that day. And at a holy site, he removed his leather footwear and wore cloth slippers in sunshine, rain, or snow. In addition to that, the Rebbe held Farbrengens, and such gatherings during which the Rebbe communicated his Torah insights and pours out a virtual flood of ideas. And those require a lot of preparation, even on the part of the Rebbe himself. We don't know how much time he needed to prepare a speech that lasted for hours, but there's no doubt that the Rebbe devoted quite a few hours in his extremely busy day to Torah study, continual study of Torah, and obviously in the deepest possible way. At his Farbrengens, he never ever used any notes. That is the time he came. He would go home in the afternoon to have tea or whatever with his wife. But at about 9 p.m., on those days that the Rebbe didn't have Yechidus, the Rebbe would leave his study and go home. He would carry a huge parcel containing hundreds of letters, paper sent for his perusal, books, and so on. He was also checked his talks that people had, the Chosrim had written down. By morning, most of these will have been read. The Rebbe maintained this routine for decades, tirelessly, continuously, without a single day off. In addition to all this, every Sunday, thousands of Jews, religious, non-religious, fair number of Gentiles, adults, children, visitors from all over the world would file past the Rebbe. He would hand each one $1 to give for tzedakah, and appointing that person to serve as a shliach mitzvah. Thousands of people lined up for hours for the privilege of catching the Rebbe's eye, receiving his brief blessing, advice, and an instantaneous solution to their pressing problems, and $1 from his hand. And many obviously would give a different dollar or many other dollars. And people who wanted to get his bracha, was too much for Yechidus. And so they would come for dollars. And people would come to him. He constantly switched from language to language: Yiddish, Hebrew, English, Russian, French, German, Spanish, all for the visitor's convenience. And from a few words spoken by the visitor, the Rebbe would grasp the crux of the matter and give a brief, definitive answer. And sometimes the Rebbe would remind the visitor of an issue raised in a visit 10 or 15 years later. And here are some of the examples. One Sunday, a gray-bearded man of about 65 said timidly to the Rebbe, "You know, Rebbe, you helped me a great deal many years ago." The Rebbe took one look at the man. He says, "Of course, 50 years ago in southern France with the baguettes." And the Rebbe explained to the curious Hasidim that at the start of the Second World War, he and several other 15-year-olds escaping from the Germans found themselves in southern France. They were starving. By some twist of fortune, they met the Rebbe. After hearing about their plight, the Rebbe asked them to wait. 15 minutes later, he came with several loaves of French breads, baguettes. Mysteriously, from a fleeting encounter 50 years earlier, the Rebbe was able to recognize the 15-year-old boy in the elderly bearded man. And yet, the Rebbe would invite people to his study for a long talk sometimes, even after he had finished Yechidus. And these were people who can influence the fate of the entire Jewish community. But the Rebbe didn't waste a moment on giving interviews to the press. He didn't attend the various ceremonies held in his honor. When the Rebbe turned 70, the United States Congress declared a National Education Day in his honor. President Jimmy Carter's advisors invited to the Rebbe to a meeting with the president at the White House. The Rebbe's reply took them by surprise. He said, "I'm too busy to attend." He didn't even find time to listen to Carter's congratulations on the phone. His advisors were dumbfounded. They had never met anyone who refused to meet or at least have a telephone conversation with the United States of America's president, the most influential political figure in the world. The Rebbe never explained his reasons for declining an offer. We could only surmise that the Rebbe must have decided that speaking to the president at that time would not benefit the Jewish people. And therefore, it would be a pity to waste that important time spent in other activities. Often in shul, the Rebbe would notice some Jew had just arrived from a remote community, and there the Rebbe would engage him in conversation and inquire about his life and his home community. The Rebbe had amazing self-control. The way the Rebbe walks to his seat in the shul, the posture while he prays, his way of speaking at Farbrengens were all amazingly consistent. The Rebbe never betrayed a sign of tiredness. For example, on his 85th birthday, he worked until 2 p.m, amongst other things, handing out dollars and blessing 3,000 people. At 3 p.m, he went to visit the Tzion. He came back to 770 at 7:30 in the evening. Then he received another 8,000 people, giving everyone $1 for charity, a blessing or a greeting or simply a look of encouragement. Those who saw him at 3 a.m. say that even when the Rebbe looked even then, the Rebbe looked as fresh as if he had just woken up. A small yet very characteristic fact is no one had ever seen the Rebbe even yawn. In conclusion, each of us, he said, simple Jews, has personal concerns. Even the best of us, who toil day and night for the benefit of the Jewish people, retain a tiny corner for personal life. Yet the Rebbe, he said, is the only person in the world who has no personal concerns. And so he needs no time for his personal affairs. This determined the entire pattern of his life. You know, there are family ties and shared concerns and daily contacts that make up human relationship. And when you don't have those shared interests anymore, or parting of the ways, it weakens and severes the human relationship. And yet, the relationship between the Rebbe and his Hasidim followed a different pattern altogether. The Hasidim love the Rebbe, even if they have never laid eyes on him. They are connected to him, even if they never exchanged a single word. Even today, when people are born after 94, the Hasidim felt that the Rebbe knew and remembered every one of them, and that he loves them and cares about them, even if he has never seen them in person. And they tell about Reb Mendel Futterfass that he spent 14 years in Siberian labor camps, enduring the cold, the hunger, and the back-breaking work. During the years after World War II, Reb Mendel Futerfas did the impossible. He organized the escape of several thousand Russian Jews to Poland, from where it was relatively easy to reach the free world at that time. One of the people he helped, and the organization helped, was the Rebbe's mother get out of Russia. As the operation was nearing completion, he was arrested. He was sentenced to death. He spent several months in jail in solitary confinement, waiting for the sentence to be carried out. At the last moment, Baruch Hashem, the death penalty was commuted to many years of hard labor. And he says, do you know, my years in Siberia were the happiest years of my life. No one could believe him. He says, yeah, those were the happy years because I knew I was suffering for my devotion to the Jewish cause, to Judaism. In the Siberian labor camp, in the 14 years I was there, I never violated Shabbos even once because I worked harder during the week and met the weekly quota. I abstained from eating treif, even when I felt that I was on the brink of starving to death. I refused to touch non-kosher food. And coming up to Pesach, by the way, he never ate chametz on Pesach either. His survival was miraculous. And he says, 5 years after my arrest, friends managed to send me a set of tefillin. This was sheer happiness. The Goyim helped me. They said they envied me because I had spiritual resources that nobody could take away from me, even those who had put me behind barbed wire. They, on the other hand, had been stripped of everything that gave meaning to their lives. All of their joys, everything that was worth living for. Some of them even offered to work on Shabbos instead of me. Whenever the guards were too close for me to put on tefillin, several of my Goyim friends would form a circle around me in the forest, using their bodies to hide me from the watchful eyes of the guards. This enabled me to put on tefillin and to pray until one day the temperature was 50 degrees below zero, and the tefillin strap just snapped from the cold as if it were made out of glass. So they said, how did you manage to endure all this? And Reb Mendel, with his eyes lit with an age-old wisdom sparkle with laughter, said, I corresponded with the Rebbe. He said, not in the literal sense of writing letters. I simply sent him mental messages like telegrams. I would describe camp life and everything that was happening to me at the moment and receive his replies, which penetrated straight into my mind. And incidentally, I found out later that the Rebbe had indeed received at least some of my mental messages. What do you mean? Oh, he says, one incident left an especially deep mark in my memory. In the late 1940s, the previous Rebbe was still Rebbe. I was in solitary confinement, waiting to be led to my execution, feeling my physical and spiritual strength draining from me. According to the Jewish calendar, it was Lag BaOmer. That's what I thought. I had constructed myself a calendar. I sent a telegram, a mental telegram to the Rebbe. Years later, I think it was 1964, he was released and permitted to leave the Soviet Union. He rejoined his wife, who was then in London. When we looked through the mail, that had accumulated during all those years. Says Reb Mendel, I was amazed to find a letter from the Rebbe, which had been sent on that same Lag Bomer, containing a reply to my mental telegram. The Rebbe knows and remembers each of his numerous chassidim, keeping track of them without the help of a computer. He is informed of each one's family status, spiritual, financial situation, down to the smallest detail. Many times, the Rebbe would recall details that the chassid himself had long forgotten. Some of the chassidim would give reports to the Rebbe describing every step in their lives. Others would refrain, reluctant to bother the Rebbe with trivial everyday. And yet, the Rebbe knows everything about them, reports or no reports. And this makes the chassid feel that he had a father whose concerns follow him every step of the way. And the chassidim would carry out every task assigned by the Rebbe. They would ask themselves, what will the Rebbe think and find about when he finds out about this undertaking? Sometimes the Rebbe's reply sounds more like an order than advice, and yet the chassid would obey the Rebbe's order exactly and hesitantly, even when the directive appeared at first glance to go against logic or expert opinion. Those who remember, in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, I think the Rebbe had already had his stroke. There was a hurricane broke out in the Atlantic Ocean, threatening to destroy everything in its path. The hurricane was moving in the direction of Florida, and meteorologists predicted it would strike Miami Beach. There were hourly weathery forecasts. With each hour, the danger became more and more menacing. The authorities evacuated those parts of Miami Beach that were most in danger. The areas that were densely populated by Chabad Chassidim were inside the danger zone. Naturally, one of the Chassidim called the Rebbe's office in New York asking for instructions. The Rebbe's reply came an hour later. The dire predictions appeared to be vastly exaggerated. No need to panic. Yet, panic continued to grip the city. Everyone fled. Only Chabad Chassidim remained in their homes. Several hours passed. The meteorological service issued a definitive warning. The hurricane was approaching fast, would reach Miami Beach within a short time. Once again, the Chassidim called the Rebbe's secretary, who reluctantly, since this was the second time they were asking the same question, approached the Rebbe. The Rebbe's reply was the same: stay put, don't panic. The night came, peals of thunder, flashes of lightning, pouring rain, violent gusts of winds. But the anticipated hurricane never reached the city. Later, the discomfited meteorologists announced that just before crossing into Florida, the hurricane suddenly changed direction, heading back to the ocean, where it eventually died out. Did the Rebbe predict it or cause it? A childless young couple appealed to the Rebbe for a bracha. Several months later, the woman became pregnant. When she was in the advanced stages of pregnancy, a fire broke out in the house. The woman was alone at home, and she fainted from the lack of oxygen. The firefighters carried her out of the burning house in a state of clinical death. The doctors had to work for hours before she was out of danger. And then the doctors decided, you have to have an abortion. The chances of the baby's survival are next to nil. And even if the baby lives, it will be abnormal. God forbid. the couple sent an urgent letter to the Rebbe explaining the doctor's decision. The Rebbe's answer was as follows: do not agree to an abortion. Get a second opinion. The couple followed his advice, but the other doctor also agreed. He said the birth will endanger both the baby and the mother. An abortion must be performed immediately. The husband sent another letter. The Rebbe's answer remained the same: no abortion under any circumstances. With God's help, everything will be fine. And as you can imagine, the mother eventually gave birth to a healthy baby girl, and later, in fact, to another healthy child, Baruch Hashem. A prominent businessman never embarked on a business venture without receiving the Rebbe's advice first. Once he had an offer to set up a company in an African country together with several partners for processing and selling precious stones. The venture required a large investment, but it promised an even more handsome return. Launching the company necessitated overcoming numerous legal hurdles. Everything was settled. All that remained was to fly to Africa and sign the contract. A day before his flight, the businessman asked the Rebbe for a bracha. The Rebbe said, in that country, only short-term deals are advisable. Do not invest any money. The businessman was shocked. He had been positive that the business would be a great success, but he didn't hesitate. An hour before his flight, he told his partner he was pulling out of the deal. The partners pleaded, insisted, threatened, demanded, to no avail. Eventually, they found another partner. The business was launched. Everything looked unbelievable. And yet, 3 months later, there was a military coup in that African country. The tens of millions of dollars invested in that business were irretrievably lost, saving this chassid. Despite experienced doctors, meteorologists, scores of other experts, to a chassid, the Rebbe was the one supreme and unquestionable authority. It is true that in most cases, the Rebbe gave his blessing and at the same time referred the person to a physician or other specialist, but there were exceptions. A chassid is confident that the Rebbe knows him better than any specialist and that he knows exactly what is best for him. What is it, you may ask? Is it prophetic vision? Is it perhaps by absorbing the Torah with his wonderful mind and projecting its influence over all worldly phenomena, that the Rebbe was always able to give proper and timely advice? That is not for us to decide. The most important principle is love. Love was at the core of everything. Love for the Jewish people burned in the Rebbe's heart, and we sense this love in his books, hear it in his voice, and see it in the reflection in his eyes. There's no wonder that thousands of people yearn for the Rebbe with all their heart, even if they have never seen him. They know that the Rebbe is concerned about them for the simple reason that they are Jews and that he will do everything and anything to enable them to fulfill their mission or to ease their burden in life. Anyone who had any connection with the Rebbe knows that the Rebbe loves him and cares about him as if he was the most important person in the world. And that possibly is why you will find the Rebbe's portrait in every room of a chassid's home. Next to the pictures of the parents and grandparents, You will hear your host mention the Rebbe's name in every sentence. You will encounter the same chassid trying to inch his way through the dense crowds to catch a glimpse of the Rebbe, even if only for the moment. And many have tried to explain the profound hidden aspects of the special two-way connection between the Rebbe and his chassidim, and to understand the role that this system of relationship plays in Chassidus and the spiritual world. However, on the earthly level, the chassid behaves this way because that's what his heart tells him to do. His sincere, wholehearted connection to the Rebbe and his boundless love for this great Jew empower and inspire him, infusing every chassid with a sense of self-confidence and well-being. Next week, we will continue in Yirtzeh Hashem with the relationship of the Rebbe and the land of Israel. As we said, we are now in the month of Nisan. And by the way, that is what gave Rabbi Masinta the initial idea to make his miracle drive and to approach Nisan to give his car. And the greatest ness was that on Yud Aleph Nisan in 1902, the Rebbe was born. Now we are coming up to Yud Aleph Nisan 2021. So it's 119th birthday. As Rabbi Masinta mentioned, we start chapter 120 on March 24th. And I would strongly urge everybody, we have now 11 days from now to Yud Aleph Nisan. Think about something that you can do in your lives, in your family lives, to connect even stronger to the Rebbe. Baruch Hashem, he gave us so many directives, be it his 10 mitzvah campaigns, be it studying his Torah, his Rambam, the Chitas, be it now Pesach is coming up, to make sure that every Jew has the handmade shmura matzah for the Seder. Make achlotik together with your family. And through that, may we truly see Mashiach by this Yud Aleph Nisan and before.
Rabbi Kala, just before you leave, firstly, thank you for that. Just on a practical thing, something you said at the beginning. Do they know what the Rebbe ate on a daily basis? And did the Rebbe wash on Shabbos?
Friday night, he must have. During the Shabbos day, I don't know what he did after the Farbrengen, but there were many Farbrengens I was at, in fact, where he finished it, there was Mincha and Ma'ariv. And nobody washed that Shabbos. They washed for Malava Malka.
And during the week?
During the week, I heard from someone, in fact, from my brother once, that there was a snowstorm. And the Rebbetzin phoned up and said that she couldn't get this babke to the Rebbe and they should pick it up. I think the Rebbetzin sent something, but there were many days that the food was not touched. That they do know.
Well,
Rebbe, basically what it comes down to is the Rebbe was a supernatural person. He did not live by any natural laws.
If you think of Yud Aleph Nisan in 1982, when the Rebbe turned 80, and the Rebbe spent 6 hours giving out tanyas to everybody, think about doing that for 6 hours, and the Rebbe showed no sign of weakness whatsoever. It was superhuman.
Superhuman, no question.
Shkoyach, thank you very much.
That was always. It wasn't just 1982. Think about any Yom Tov Farbrengen. The Rebbe would wash before Shkia. He would farbrengen till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Then he would hand out Koshel Bracha from the cup he had made Havdalah, benching and Havdalah on, to every person there. And he would encourage singing. And people would come, not only that were there at the Farbrengen, people would come from the whole New York, from the whole New Jersey, from Philadelphia, And the Rebbe would go literally till hours in the morning, encouraging, focusing on each person. Some people he would give a bottle of wine to, a bottle of mashke to, he would give a bracha to. It was superhuman. Until 1977, I don't think, until that Shmini Atzeres, there wasn't a chassid in the world who thought of the Rebbe in human terms. And throughout his life, he just was a superhuman. There's no explanation. In everything, in his advice, in his encouragement, in the Chabad that he set up, and including in his personal life.
Absolutely agreed. Yasher Koyach, we look forward to hearing you next week. And maybe next week we'll play, just for 1 or 2 minutes, the Rebbe giving kosher bracha and show people that.